whether or not you're going to run for mayor. With that, I'd like to introduce our Supervisor, Zev Yaroslavsky. Thank you very much, Richard.
Come to the territory center.
I don't think so.
Want to make sure you're not behind.
Change microphones.
Is this the one that's working? Or?
That's better.
All right. First of all, thank you for inviting me back to the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I want to cover a number of issues, and I'll try to do it in rapid fire. My first thing, the first thing on my list is to thank you, the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, Richard and his committee, for helping to stop a redistricting plan for the Board of Supervisors, which would have been a disaster for the San Fernando Valley and for Sherman Oaks in particular. Some of you, many of you, wrote letters, sent emails, and I want you to know that the public response, not only in my district, not only in the San Fernando Valley, but from all over the county, in opposing a scheme which would have divided the San Fernando Valley into 3 supervisorial districts. You would have been in the same district with Long Beach, Cerritos, and Lomita. You know where Lomita is. You probably deserve to be in that district, but it's ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. Pacoima and Sylmar would have been in the same, Van Nuys would have been in the same district with Cudahy, Huntington Park, Bell, and Vernon. So obviously this was an issue for us, not for me personally, politically, because I'm termed out. I have run for my last supervisorial election, so it doesn't matter to me personally or professionally where the districts are. What matters to me is that the districts be the right districts, and that the communities of interest that we have all worked hard to maintain and preserve, that communities that have common interests like development, land use, transportation, preservation of the Hollywood Hills and the Santa Monica Mountains, those kinds of things, that our communities not be split up, so that a community like Sherman Oaks has even less influence over a district the size of mine, which is 2 million people, than it used to have. You have a lot of voice here in Sherman Oaks. Studio City, Sherman Oaks, Encino, Tarzana makes up a significant part of my district. But if you start putting it into the district with Long Beach and Torrance and Hawthorne and Cerritos and communities like that, you aren't the driving force behind some of the policies, whether it's transit or regional policies that the Board of Supervisors handles. You become an appendage to a supervisor whose political center of gravity is not Mulholland Drive, if you will, the geographic center of gravity. I'm going to see if this works. But you would be in a district whose center of gravity politically is in Torrance. So people who represent that district might live in Cerritos, might live in Long Beach, and this area, this community would have been an afterthought.
Let's try this one.
So we needed, that's much better. So we needed to stop that plan, and there was an overwhelming response from communities all over the county of Los Angeles, from Diamond Bar to Sherman Oaks to Calabasas and Agoura Hills and Westlake Village. It was just unbelievable. But there was no greater response than there was from Sherman Oaks. When I called Richard and told him about this, he grilled me. He wanted to know what the facts were, why this should be important to Sherman Oaks. He didn't trust just what I had to say on its face. He wanted me to defend myself like a good lawyer. And but once he heard the arguments, he delivered. And the volume of mail and emails that we got on the record, which is very important for us, was overwhelming from Sherman Oaks, from this community. So thank you for that. We prevailed. It takes 4/5 of the board, 4 of the 5 members of the board, to approve a reapportionment plan. We do it ourselves with the assistance of a Citizens Advisory Committee. but it takes 4/5 of the board to do it. And we didn't have 4 votes going into this process, but at the end, the public response was so overwhelming and so compelling that we picked up an additional vote, and what we approved was a map that is largely, it's not completely identical because we had to shift populations around to meet the census. Each district has to be equal in population to one another, and many of the districts got out of whack over the last 10 years. But for the most part, it looks a lot more similar to the previous districts than to the ones that were proposed. The ones that we proposed, that we opposed, we're going to move 3.5 million people from one district to another. You would have woken up on Monday, you would have been in my district. On Tuesday, you would have been in the 4th district, which is Long Beach and Cerritos in that area. You would have been in a district with a supervisor for whom you never voted. And by the way, I would have been in a district that would have included Cudahy, Huntington Park, Boyle Heights, which is where I grew up, so there was a little bit of a tug of war in my inner self. But I would have been in a district where most of the people would not have voted for me. It was stupid. It was absolutely ridiculous. And fortunately, we ended up with a plan where only 275 to 300,000 people have moved. That's a lot different than 3.5 to 3.7 million people, and we prevailed. So thank you for that. It keeps our district intact. It will continue to give you the influence that you deserve to have and that our district deserves to have over county-wide policy that includes things like transportation. As Richard said, I serve on the MTA board. All 5 members of the MTA board, of the Board of Supervisors, serve on the MTA board. So having a representative from this part of the county on the MTA board is very important. To lose me in 2 years or 3 years, to lose me and end up with a supervisor from the eastern part of the county, or the southeastern part of the county, would have diminished your voice on things like the 405 corridor, on transit in the valley, on things like the Orange Line extension, the subways, the light rail project on the 405, which I'll talk about briefly in a second. Those, you would have had far less influence on those kinds of projects, and frankly, you would have had no influence. So this is a good thing. So that's number one, and I wanted to thank you for that. I want to give you a quick state of the county. I won't belabor the point. The county, in the worst fiscal situation that the state has faced and the country has faced in 2 generations, with the city laying people off and furloughing people, with the state laying off people and furloughing people, with middle-sized cities and small cities laying off people and furloughing people, the county of Los Angeles, because of its prudent fiscal management that has gone on for 16 years, we've set aside a reserve so that we can navigate the lean years, and we have been in 3 or 4 lean years now. We have not laid off a single employee, and we have not had to furlough a single employee. We've also not given any raises to our employees. Unlike the city, where raises were given a couple, 3 years ago, 5-year contracts with 25%, 5% a year. That was just the base. We have now, for the 3rd consecutive year, we have given 0 cost of living increases to our employees. And by the way, it was not a contentious issue with our employees. Our employee unions and us have been partners. As much as an employee union and an employer can trust each other, there is a level of trust between us at the county. We have said, when we get back to the good years, we will reward you. But in the lean years, let's keep everybody working. Because if we give a cost of living increase to the employees, we're going to have to lay off 10 or 15% of them. And that's just not fair, it's not right. But the unions have agreed with us. So every employee continues to earn a decent salary, decent benefits, can put food on the table. They're not going to starve having 0 cost of living, but it enables us to keep our employees working, and just as important, if not more important, it enables us to continue to provide vital services to you, the people of LA County. So that is the state of the county financially. I'm not going to tell you that we're in great shape. We're not in great shape. We've spent down our reserve and our one-time monies that we've set aside, but we haven't spent it all down, and we continue to manage our fiscal affairs in such a way as to minimize the fiscal dislocation that this economy is causing so many other people. But it's not a secret as to why this is happening. It's happening because the 5 supervisors, which I'm only one, have discipline, and are willing to say no to requests that are unsustainable and unjustified in the interest of being able to provide services to you. There are a couple of issues that are going on right now. One of them you heard about from the captain, the LAPD captain. I want to talk about realignment for a second. This is one of the most misguided proposals that I've ever seen, and I've been in public office for 36.5 years. This is one of the most misguided proposals to come out of the state of California in my entire career. Here's what they did. The state has a budget problem. The state also has an overcrowding problem in the state prisons. Those two issues combine to generate this idea called realignment. What is realignment? It's really a misnomer. It's the state taking a responsibility that has previously been the state's responsibility and shirking that responsibility, dumping that responsibility on counties. That's called realignment. We call it, in the fiscal business, taking your bad debts off of your books and putting them on our books. And that's exactly what it is. It's not a high-minded policy issue. There's no redeeming policy that stems from this realignment. It's simply an accounting trick to take a responsibility that they can't afford and put it on us, which, by the way, we can't afford. They promised us that they would pay for it. And in the first year, they have given us 80% of the money for these services, for these responsibilities. Responsibilities are over parolees, parolees who are released, and parolees who have to go back to prison because they violate their parole. And there are several thousand of them. And by the way, we have an overcrowded prison in downtown, our jails. It's not a prison, it's the jails. All of our jails are overcrowded. So I don't know where we're going to put 4,000 prisoners that end up having to go back to jail when we don't have 4,000 beds to put them in, or 5,000, whatever the number that we're going to get. We're going to be responsible. We're going to become the parole officers for the so-called nonviolent parolees. So if you go to state prison for a nonviolent crime, burglary, or embezzlement, or something like that, and you're released on parole, you're going to be returned to the county. That's normally the way it works, even when the state had the responsibility. But what the difference is that instead of the state parole officers handling these parolees when they come into town, now it's going to be the responsibility of the county probation department to be the parole officer for these so-called nonviolent offenders. Now, the interesting thing about nonviolent offenders, and this is why the district attorney of this county, Steve Cooley, was so apoplectic about this policy back in January, and he was right, is that if you're in prison now for embezzlement, a nonviolent crime, and you get released on parole, you're considered a nonviolent parolee, because your last crime, the crime for which you were being paroled, was a nonviolent crime. But if you were in prison 10 years ago or 15 years ago for attempted murder, and you did your time and were paroled at that time, and then committed the crime of embezzlement and got arrested for that, and now you're being paroled for that, you're not considered a violent criminal, even though you may have done something violent in the previous crime that you committed. So the way the state has told the story is we're not sending dangerous criminals back into these communities for the county to handle. These are non-violent, non-sexual offenders, non-this, non-that. That only applies to the last crime, the crime for which they are being paroled. But if they've committed a sexual crime or a violent crime in a previous iteration, that's not counted against them when they're paroled to this community and we take responsibility for them. So we're concerned about that. The state, I was about to say, the state promised to pay us, reimburse us for the cost of assuming this responsibility. They gave us 80% of the money it cost them to perform this responsibility. Where they got the 80% figure, I don't know, but they made a statement the county is much more efficient and does it much less expensively than the state does. That may be true. That we do it more efficiently, I don't doubt is true. That we do it less expensively is yet to be determined. But our challenge now is to do what the state did for $1, we're going to have to do for 80 cents. And we'll see whether that pans out. The state also promised us that they would guarantee us funding for the first 5 years of this program, and they would put a state constitutional amendment on the ballot for you to vote on that would guarantee these reimbursements in perpetuity. We have no guarantee that we're going to get funding for the next 4 years, and there is no state constitutional amendment that has been proposed in the legislature, let alone put on the ballot for you to vote on. So you can understand why the county, not just Los Angeles County, but counties up and down the state of California, are nervous and feel a bit betrayed by this whole realignment crack policy. How does this affect you? Well, we'll see. As the captain said, we'll see what the level of crime is when some of these parolees come here, violate their parole, as some of them always do, and we have to put them in prison, in our state jail, in our county jails. When we put them in our county jails, since we don't have enough room for them, we're going to have to kick somebody out of the jail to make room for them. Who those somebodies are going to be people who are waiting for trial, or people who are in jail for a misdemeanor, who are there for 6 months or a year in our county jails. Whether that will increase crime on the streets of Sherman Oaks or the rest of LA County remains to be seen. But none of this was thought through. This was rushed through in January as a budget, emergency budget kind of a scheme. Nobody thought all these things through, and now we're going to be left to deal with the consequences. And my experience with previous realignments, because there have been other programs like this that have been shifted from the state to the county, is they promise us in the first year, don't worry, we're going to fund it, we'll fully fund it. And after the second or third year, when they have another problem in the state budget, they'll cut the budget for covering these responsibilities, and we'll be left holding the bag. And then it will affect you, because it will affect the services we provide for you. So it's a bait and switch kind of a scheme. You've been reading about the county jails. Speaking of the county jails, we have a mess on our hands in the county jails. All of us are very disturbed about what's going on. Anybody who's in the county jail, almost everyone who's in the county jail, deserves to be there and to do the time that they've been sentenced to do by the courts. What they don't deserve is to have whatever constitutional rights they have as prisoners to be violated. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna about these things, but I don't believe that somebody who's arrested and convicted of a misdemeanor and spends time in our county jail should be a punching bag for any of our county personnel in the jail. If you have to subdue a prisoner who's not being cooperative, you subdue them, and there are non-violent ways to subdue them, or less violent ways to subdue them, than to take his head and smash it against the concrete wall in the jail. That's been happening, and it's been happening too many times. And it's not just a violation of their rights, of their human rights, and of common sense, but it's also violating your pocketbook. Because we are paying big money to these folks who sue us when their rights are violated. And some of these cases are hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece, $1 million, $2 million, depending on the injury and what happens. We don't need to be putting the taxpayers' money at risk in this way. And the answer to what's going on in our jails, and by the way, the overwhelming majority of our sheriff's deputies in the jails are professional, and they aren't the problem. But in any organization, when you have any percentage, meaningful percentage of employees who are not following the rules, it creates a culture of rule violation generally. And we have that problem in the jail. The sheriff has recognized it, has candidly admitted that he hadn't been informed adequately about all the things that were going to the jail. He has, I think, gotten religion. I know he's gotten religion on this. I've had many conversations with him about this. And he's going to get his arms around this one way or the other. The Board of Supervisors yesterday, on my motion, my proposal, to create a panel of 7 people. And, you know, some people said, well, it's another panel, another commission. We haven't had a commission in 22 years in the Sheriff's Department. We haven't had a commission in 17 years that we've appointed for a special reason, since we appointed a commission of 5 people to solve our health care financing crisis in 1995. And that turned out pretty well. We saved our health system with a commission that lasted for 30 days. This is an important commission. We are going to impanel a group of respected jurists, experts, in incarceration, 7 people whose integrity and professionalism and competence is unassailable, to look at the root causes of the cultural problems we have in our jail and give us a roadmap of how to fix it. We're going to give them 180 days, 6 months, or less, to give us that roadmap. And then we're going to hold the sheriff and the sheriff's department to it, and I believe that the sheriff will hold himself to it. Because he has endorsed this, he has welcomed this, and it's one thing to say no to a board of supervisors because you get used to it and you get away with it enough times. It's going to be hard to say no to a panel that includes a Supreme Court, retired Supreme Court justice, a retired federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals justice. It's going to be hard to do that. And we'll have ways to enforce it if we have to. It's not done in a common sense way. But that's something that we approved yesterday unanimously by the board. The panel will be chosen by November 1st, which is just a couple of weeks away, and off we go. It is a serious problem, and if you know me, and most of you know me for a long time, I don't try to get involved in issues that every other politician gets involved in, because it isn't worth the aggravation and the competition for television time and radio time. I'll leave it up to other people. I get involved in issues which most politicians don't choose to get involved in. Defending the rights of prisoners is not a politically remunerative issue, but I think you will understand that it's financially remunerative if we do this right, because you're going to end up, you and I, as taxpayers, will end up paying the bill, and you don't deserve to have to do that. You have enough taxes on your tax bill. You have enough services that aren't being provided to live you to last you a lifetime, and you don't need this kind of nonsense to aggravate that situation. So we're on that, and I think the stars are aligned, where the ACLU on the one side of the spectrum, the sheriff on the other side of the spectrum, respected leaders from all parts of the spectrum will come together to address this issue once and for all. It's not impossible. It's been done in other counties and cities around the country where they've had exactly the same problems and they solved it. There's no reason why a deputy sheriff in our jails or a custody assistant in our jails can't do the job in accordance with the rules and safely. Safely for himself or herself, the deputy, and safely for the people who are incarcerated. The last thing I want to touch on is the one thing that was in the flyer that I'll touch on, because when Richard asked me what do you want to talk about, none of these things were on my agenda at that time. So I will touch about on the economy briefly and really tie it into transportation. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that we have all the answers to the economy. We don't. And certainly not at the local level. But we have a role to play. And when you look at the economic situation nationwide and the sustained unemployment rate that we have, and you look at California as a percentage of that, of the nation's economy, we're about 22% of the nation's economy. So if we solve unemployment in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania and a few other Ohio Valley and River Valley states, but we don't solve it here in California, the national economic picture is still bleak, because we are so big that we are a drag. If we have a lousy economy in California, we are a drag on the rest of the country, even if the rest of the country is doing better. Los Angeles County and its 5-county area, Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange counties, make up about a third of the state's economy. So if the state is 22% of the national economy, and we're a third of the state economy, that's 7 or 8% of the national economy right here in Southern California. And I may be off by 1 or 2%, but it gives you an idea. If California is going to get out of its economic doldrums, it's got to start in Los Angeles County. Because you can solve the problem in Fresno and Mono and Yolo County and San Francisco County and Santa Clara County, but if you don't solve it in Los Angeles County and San Bernardino and Riverside County, we are a drag on the rest of the state. So that's a long way of saying that if you want to solve the nation's economic problems, it all starts here in Los Angeles County. And that's really a fact. So we are focused like a laser beam on trying to get people back to work. We have the vehicle to do it, and that's Measure R. The half-cent sales tax you voted for and approved overwhelmingly, I might add, in Sherman Oaks back in 2008. It's the transit half-cent sales tax. It's what will build rail lines and highways and sound walls and bridges all over Los Angeles County, just in Los Angeles County. We need to accelerate that plan. The mayor has gone back to Washington 1,000 times, has gotten the president's attention on this, has gotten the leaders of both houses of Congress on this, both Democrats and Republicans, to get what is now being termed the America Fast Forward Plan. What does that mean? It means that the half-cent sales tax that we approved was over a 30-year period. Every year we collect whatever it is, $800–900 million in sales taxes for each penny, so a half a cent is $400–500 million. And we get that money, that $400 or $500 million, every year. Over 30 years, adjusted for inflation, it's a lot of money. So what we have tried to do, convince the federal government to do, and it's getting some traction, is advance us the money now. Lend us the money like a mortgage now. We will pay you back over 30 years as our sales tax trickles in. And in that way, we can accelerate 30 years worth of projects, because without that, our plan was to build all of our projects over 30 years. So the subway extension on the west side of Los Angeles would go from Western Avenue to Fairfax in the first 10 years, and then from Fairfax to Century City in the second 10 years. And then 30 years from now, the last leg to Westwood would be completed. There's a light rail project planned for the 405 from West LA to Van Nuys. It's a very important project. There's $1 billion in the Measure R plan for the 405 light rail. It's going to cost a lot more than that, but we would get federal money to match that. The trouble is that the $1 billion is in the third decade of the Measure R program. So what we want to do is get the federal government to lend us the money now, so that we can build all of the 30 years worth of projects in the first decade, the first 10 years. It's physically possible to do. And we will pay the federal government back. This is a no-brainer. It's a win-win for the federal government, because they usually give us money. They don't lend us money. They give us grants for transportation projects. Not a lot of money, not the kind of money that we're asking to lend us, but they give us money and they never get paid back. We're saying, lend us the money now, you're going to get paid back. And you'll have that money to then lend out to another community, or maybe our community if we extend the tax in 30 years. And in so doing, that's the win for the federal government. What's the win for us? We get all of the Measure R projects in the next 10 years, by the end of this decade, 2021 maybe. The subway all the way to Westwood, light rail line from Westwood to the Van Nuys, extension of the Orange Line system up the Van Nuys corridor, Van Nuys Boulevard corridor to Sylmar, projects all over the region. We can do that in 1 decade. And so that the legacy that we will all have left as a result of Measure R will have been this vitally necessary infrastructure that will give all of us an alternative to driving in our single-occupant cars, which most of us do every day. Now you have public transportation, a decent public transportation system in our lifetime. That's the idea. What's the third win in this thing? The third win is it produces 166,000 very good jobs, construction jobs, over the next 10 years. And each construction job is worth 2 or 3 other jobs, secondary jobs, tertiary jobs, that are created because we put a construction worker back to work. So it's a win for the federal government, it's a win for us as taxpayers, the infrastructure that we get, and it's a win for our economy. And the reason it's getting traction in Washington now is because they're looking for something that'll work to get the unemployment rate down. They've tried everything. They've given away money, they've given the banks money, banks won't lend the money. They've done every trick in the book, and the unemployment rate continues to hover at 9.1% nationwide. And here in Southern California, it's 12–13%, and in certain communities in our county, in communities of color, the poorer communities of the county, the unemployment rate is double that. It can be 25–30%. So let's try something intelligent that will put people back to work, evidently put people back to work, get the economy back on track. I'm hoping beyond hope that somehow this idea will leapfrog over the political gridlock that we have in Washington today, and we have in Sacramento today. And it may be too much of a dream, but we're not going to go down without a fight. And I think we have a shot at getting some of this done. So with that, let me just conclude. I'll answer Richard's question. I have made no decision at this point, but I'm getting very close, and you will hear soon enough what my decision is. This is largely for me a personal decision. I want to decide what I really want to do with the rest of my productive life, because this is a big decision. I love this city. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I served 19 and a half years in the city council. I don't like what's happened at City Hall on a whole lot of fronts. I also don't like some of the things that have happened in the home administration, and I want to fix those too. So I've got a decision to make, having been in this field for 36, 37 years now, what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I'm not a believer in term limits, but 4 decades is a good run. And the question is whether I want to make it 5. And you know, I've gotten a lot of encouragement from a lot of my friends here in Sherman Oaks and all over the county, and that's what makes this decision so hard, because people have a lot of trust in me, a lot of confidence in me. I think I think all of it is overrated. At least that's what my wife tells me. I'm not going to, whatever I do, I'm not going to walk away from my civic involvement in the city and county. Lastly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve you all these years. I've said that every time I come here. And I really thank the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, because this has always been the go-to homeowners association. When there's a political crisis, when I needed help, like on redistricting, one phone call turns the political power of this community loose, and you have a lot of power, and it goes well beyond Sherman Oaks. I want to introduce Benita Trujillo, who's my deputy in my Van Nuys office, who's here. And she doesn't get paid extra to be here tonight, but she loves Sherman Oaks too. And she's been a great deputy for me since I became a supervisor. So with that, Richard, I'll take some questions if you have.
Okay, and Bobby Anderson is on audition. This gentleman, Matt Epstein, asked the questions, but he had a personality at a lead, so Bob is going to be auditioning tonight. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. This doesn't work. That's my first. Thank you, Richard, for making it so easy. Quite a few questions, so we'll rush through them as quickly as we can. First one from Jim Demetrian. 405 traffic's horrible. This week, because of everything they're doing, it's backing up from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. all the way to Victory Boulevard. There's been no modification of the traffic signals to help this. Why not?
Well, what traffic signals? There are no traffic signals on the freeway. You mean on the surface streets?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a question, it's a legitimate question, and you can pose it to me, and I'll pose it to the city traffic engineers at the Caltrans. The traffic signals on the surface streets are city traffic signals, and there should be a constant upgrading and updating of that. They computerize most of the traffic signals now. But let me be very honest with you. The 405 project is going to be a pain in the ass for the next couple of years. Okay, it just is, and we will do everything we can to mitigate the problems, the traffic, the inconvenience that it causes, and it does. It's causing a tremendous amount of inconvenience to the people who go to school, kids who go to school up on Mulholland Drive. This has been an issue that's been killing us, and I think we have mitigated it to some degree, getting Caltrans to put some traffic control people there. We're going to have an issue. This is not going to affect Sherman Oaks, but we're going to have an issue over near the Worcester off-ramps and on-ramps, where they're going to redo the whole off-ramp system there. As you know, those are the southbound off-ramps on Wilshire are the 2 most dangerous off-ramps in the country, because the on-ramp is north of the off-ramp. So when you're trying to get off the freeway, you have to cut in front of people who are getting on the freeway. We've had more accidents there than ever before. We're going to fix that for the first time, but there's going to be tremendous inconvenience for many, many weeks for the people who live around there. Let me know. You all have my email address. It's on the brochure that Benita handed out. yellow brochure. And email me if you have a specific location, and we will follow it up with Caltrans and Metro. There are a lot of problems with it, and we can solve some of them, address some of them, but overall, do what I do, I avoid the 405 if I can. And that's the way it's going to be for a while.
Easy.
How did you like Armageddon though? That worked out all right. You're going to get to do that again next summer.
Okay, Ron Spiegel asks the next question. It's an easy one. Do you support the NFL? Do you support the NFL football stadium in downtown LA?
I haven't seen the financial details of that project. As a philosophical matter, forget the finances for a second, as to whether the downtown area is appropriate for a football stadium, I think it is. It's not without its problems, it's not without its traffic problems, but I work in downtown every day. I know the ins and outs of those streets. I know a lot about the convention center. The convention center, at least the part that they're going to tear down, is dying, has been dying for 25 years. The stadium that they are proposing to build is an indoor stadium, which when I first heard that I thought was preposterous. Why would you build an indoor stadium in Southern California? But as an indoor stadium, they can attract the Final Four. We haven't had a Final Four in Los Angeles. The Final Four, for those of you who are not college basketball fans, is the national championship tournament. The final 4 teams play in a tournament in a city, and it's not quite a Super Bowl, but it brings huge amounts of revenue into a city. Tens of thousands of people come in from all over the country, spend their money, pay taxes, and leave. We haven't had a Final Four in Los Angeles since 1972. I was at it. It was at the sports arena. UCLA beat Louisville that year. John Wooden beat Denny Crump. Those are your basketball trivia freaks. But that's the last one we've had in Los Angeles, and there hasn't been a Final Four on the west coast of the United States since 1995. So this is an opportunity to do something. To get a professional football stadium, whether it's here or wherever it's going to be, downtown or Diamond Bar or City of Industry, I'm sorry, to be able to get a Super Bowl or 2 or 3 Super Bowls in a decade is huge. Super Bowl is a huge economic infusion. It's essentially free money for our economy. It's a jolt to our economy in a positive sense. So I'm a supporter of the concept. I just don't know what the financials are, and only because I don't sit in the city council and I haven't been privy to the information that they've been given. The one thing I have warned my colleagues in the city council is make sure that whatever is developed there, number one, you're going to lose some money while it's being built at the convention center, and that's going to be a problem, and that ought to be factored into the equation. And secondly, make sure that when it's finally built, that you have a sound analysis of what is real. Final Fours are real, Super Bowls are real. But saying you're going to get 25 conventions, I'm not saying that's what they've said, but I'm saying they sold me a bill of goods back in the 1980s when we built the new convention center in downtown, that it was going to bring all these conventions to LA, and as a result, we borrowed $500 million. We issued $500 million in bonds to build that convention center on the expectation that the convention business, the rents that they would pay when they came here, would pay off the bonds. Well, we didn't get the conventions, and as a result, the general fund of the city had to pay off the bonds. And when I left the city in 1994, I believe that the figure we were spending annually to service the debt on the bonds was somewhere in the neighborhood of $55 to $60 million annually. That's a lot of money for a convention center that was supposed to pay for itself. So that was my only concern. Paul Corey, who's your councilman, party was represented by Paul, was very articulate in his analysis of that, and I think that analysis is a work in progress, and that's the only thing I would caution my colleagues in the city. But philosophically, it's not a bad place. Not the only place, but it's not a bad place.
Here's a question from. Here's a question from Emil Walton. You've been very good at protecting the Santa Monica Mountains. Who is going to take your place since you're turned down?
Yeah, I don't know who's going to take my place. This is going to be a very attractive office for a lot of elected officials and non-elected officials, and there ought to be a good competition for it. I'll tell you who I'd like to take my place, not by name, obviously, because I don't know who the candidates are going to be, but I would want a candidate who would be as uncompromising as I have been in protecting the Santa Monica Mountains. Now, I represent the unincorporated area out there when you get out of the Conejo Valley. I used to represent this part of the Santa Monicas, whatever we call them, Santa Monicas, Hollywood Hills, when I was a city councilman. And these hills here are the responsibility of your city, mayor of the city council. But out when you get to the far western part of the county, I am the city councilman, if you will. I am the municipal official, because the unincorporated areas, which are not part of any city, are the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors. And I have been totally uncompromising about development in the Santa Monica Mountains. There have been very few developments approved out there, and the ones that have been developed really predated me, and I kind of had an legal obligation to see the process through. But even in that process, we scaled projects down. We haven't had a major subdivision in the Santa Monica Mountains since I've been on the board, and that's really important to me, because it should be important to you, even if you don't live there. Because 25, 50 years from now, the only open space that's going to be left in this southern part of California is going to be the Santa Monica Mountains. Griffith Park, the Santa Monica Mountains. The Santa Monica Mountains are tens of thousands of acres now of publicly owned land. It'll be the oasis that our children and grandchildren are going to have from this megalopolis. And I can even envision, I hope I'm wrong, but every time I drive to San Diego and I drive through Camp Pendleton, I keep thinking that someday, when we don't have to train Marines anymore, the federal government's going to say that beachfront property is too valuable to just let sit there as open space, and they'll sell it. You know, we had an administration that wanted to sell the Veterans Administration just a few years ago in West LA. We fought that. You can envision a day where from the Mexican border to San Luis Obispo, there's going to be nothing but development, except for the places that we have reserved for public parks. And the Santa Monicas are the biggest urban national park in the country. So that's an important thing to me. But there'll be a healthy competition, and there should be. It's a great job. It's a challenging job. And there are a lot of good people in our district who can do the job well.
That's great. Thank you. Helicopter noise. We reported on it tonight. We had several questions. We have a lot of support from the City Council. We have support from the State Assembly, from the U.S. Congress. Is the Board of Supervisors considering anything? What's the position?
The Board of Supervisors, I assume, because I'm going to propose a resolution for this effect, will support the Berman legislation. I expect that they will. There's no reason why they wouldn't. Every supervisor's district is plagued by helicopter noise. Congressman Berman has introduced the most significant piece of legislation on helicopter noise since I've been a public official. And there's a window of opportunity is open. There are some other areas of the country that have helicopter issues. And Howard, who is the most skilled legislator, in my opinion, in the entire House of Representatives. And let me just say, I support him. I've endorsed him for re-election. We cannot afford to lose him. And this redistricting that went on with the state and federal districts created nothing but havoc. And it's a real tragedy and shame that people who are of like minds are going to have to run against each other. But Howard is the most skilled legislator in the House as far as I am concerned, as far as I know. So I believe that Howard is going to get this bill passed in some iteration. And we need it. One of the biggest complaint I had during Carmageddon was from Sherman Oaks. The helicopters that were hovering over here. I live in the Fairfax area. I live a mile from the British Consul General's home. And when Prince William was here in June, the helicopters were hovering all day and into the night. And when you're only a mile as the crow flies from the target site, those helicopters have a big radius, and kept us up a good part of the night. So I felt it personally. The Hollywood Bowl, those of you who frequent the Hollywood Bowl, the deterioration of adherence to the flight prohibition over the Hollywood Bowl has been palpable over these last 10, 15 years. And somehow I think it's almost like it's a conspiracy. These helicopter pilots buzz the bowl, especially during those very quiet and sensitive classical pieces. When they're doing Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, nobody would hear the helicopters as they came by, but they don't come when it's the 1812 overture. They come in the second movement of Beethoven's, fifth, and it drives me nuts. And the FAA needs to be given the authority, and then they have to assert their authority to regulate helicopter flight patterns, helicopter altitudes, for all of our sakes. Now there is a bill that's working its way through. Howard was telling me over Long Island, where there's a helicopter noise problem over the Hamptons. So the Hamptons have a lot of political juice, and they're working a bill there, and Howard, I think, sees an opportunity to work the bill here. So the board, I certainly support it, and I have no doubt that the board will support it as well.
Okay. With that, we want to give people an opportunity to come up and speak to the supervisor. What we're going to do is send to him the questions that can understand the issues and then get back.